What is NAD and what are its implications in terms of health and disease?
It's a coenzyme that's found in all living cells, plant and animal. NAD is at every step along the way in that conversion process of taking oxygen and nutrients and converting it into ATP. When you elevate NAD, you not only have an increase in mitochondrial biogenesis, you have more mitochondria. It actually creates actual energy without creating more calories. If you don't have a good night's sleep, your NAD levels across the board are going to be lower. If you overexert yourself in an exercise, immediately after your NAD levels are going to be low, because what do we do when we work out? We basically damage cells. They're immediately trying to repair themselves. Elevating NR increases the amount of mother's milk, and that when moms who take NR pass the milk, the NR through the babies are bigger, stronger, have larger brains.
If you could erase one BS narrative in the longevity world, what would it be? Rob, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Nice to be here. Doing great.
You won an Oscar. You have run a movie studio. You have this incredible career in Hollywood, and you've since pivoted, despite all of your many successes, to running one of the preeminent science platforms in the world regarding NAD. So I want to learn more about that pivot. I want to learn about all things NAD, and I want to learn about NR, nicotinamide riboside. So let's just start high level. Do you see, what is NAD, and what are its implications in terms of health and disease?
NAD is very exciting. It stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. It's a coenzyme that's found in all living cells, plant and animal, and is vital to all key metabolic processes within that cell. We make energy inside the cell. It's not made outside the cell. There are these organelles called mitochondria, which take oxygen from air that we breathe and nutrients from food that we eat, and they put it through something that we've called the Krebs cycle. And the yield of that process is something called ATP, these molecules that are filled with energy that transfer throughout the cell. NAD is at every step along the way in that conversion process of taking oxygen and nutrients and converting it into ATP. We have studies that show that when you elevate NAD with NR, you not only have an increase in mitochondrial biogenesis, you have more mitochondria, but you have a higher yield per mitochondria. It actually creates actual energy without creating more calories.
Wow, that's incredible. We've done a number of episodes on the importance of mitochondrial health, and conversely, the conditions associated with mitochondrial dysfunction. And so this is a really interesting sort of piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, and NAD even goes beyond mitochondrial health. There are mechanisms in place within the cell for healing when there is damage. There are these enzymes called PARP enzymes, where there's a gene mutation, or there's some physical damage, or there's oxidative stress or inflammation. One group of PARP enzymes will flag it, and another group of PARP enzymes will try to heal it or cure it. And then even another group, if the cell is irreparable, will actually do something called apoptosis, kill the cell. All those processes are related to NAD. So when you have a high saturation level of NAD, they do those things very well. So it makes sense that as a prophylactic for disease or other types of conditions, high NAD levels are important.
And what is the relationship between NAD and aging?
Great question. I've heard people say NAD is aging. The levels of NAD that we have decline fairly rapidly, even beginning in your 20s. But what we've seen is that when a cell is under metabolic stress of any type, that's when NAD levels go down. Interestingly, there are these whole sets of orphan diseases, meaning rare diseases, that where kids age very, very rapidly. There's several of them. We've studied all of them.
Progeria, is that one of them?
That's an example of one. Cockayne syndrome is another example of one. Ataxia, where these kids age very rapidly, and some of them, they actually die of old age at the age of 12 or 13. What we've seen in some of these conditions is non-detectable levels of NAD.
Wow.
So the relationship between NAD and the way the body ages is quite direct. And what is aging? Aging is the accumulation of damage at the molecular level. That's all it is, but the diminished ability to repair that damage. Right, so by elevating NAD, you're improving the cell's ability to not only create energy, but also to heal itself. So you have less damage.
Now, how much research is there elucidating the causal role of NAD in all this? Because, I mean, it's one thing to decline in a way that's associated with aging, right? But is the decline in NAD, have we determined whether or not the decline in NAD is causally related to the dysfunction that we see related to aging?
That's a very good question, and specifically relating to those orphan diseases. We don't know if the non-detectable levels of NAD is because that caused the disease or if it's just correlational. Because the cell's trying to cure some sort of DNA damage and consumes all the NAD in an effort to do that. We don't know the answer to that question, if it's causal or correlational. But we do know that by elevating NAD levels, the cell performs better.
That sounds auspicious.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so how would you stack it? You know, there's a lot of talk of telomeres, for example, as like one of the biomarkers of aging. It's like the, shoelace caps at the end of your chromosomes is how they're colloquially thought of as. How would you where would you place NAD in terms of its reliability as an aging biomarker?
The telomere research is really fascinating and quite interesting. And there again, we have seen obviously a correlation between the length of the telomere and age. But we haven't, there's an example of elongating telomeres. We haven't been able to do that and prevent aging or reverse aging.
Right.
However, it's a very specific biomarker. The thing about NAD is it sort of varies over time, even during the day and even organ to organ. Most people are measuring their blood NAD levels these days. Blood NAD levels isn't really a great indicator of how high your NAD levels are. Where you have a damaged cell is where you're likely to have a diminished NAD level. It's very difficult to do that in a kidney. You have to get a biopsy.
Right.
There are ways to measure NAD in a brain with an MRI without actually non-invasively. But we don't really have good, consistent, easy ways to measure NAD levels in the tissue. And it varies. In the course, it's almost like cholesterol. In the course of the day, it could go up, it could go down. If you're feeling stress, it's clearly going to go down because it's consuming the NAD. So it's probably not a good direct marker for aging.
But it's related to processes that could potentially help improve quality of life, can extend health span, possibly even lifespan, it sounds like.
I think we've gotten to the point where we've shown that. But as a specific marker for what your metabolic or biological age might be, I don't think it's a great marker for that.
Interesting. Yeah, because it's not, because it can be depleted by stress.
Exactly. If you don't have a good night's sleep, your NAD levels across the board are going to be lower. If you overexert yourself in an exercise, immediately after, your NAD levels are going to be low because what do we do when we work out? We basically damage cells. They're immediately trying to repair themselves. So that we know it helps your health, and we know that elevating NAD levels improves your health span. It might extend lifespan. We don't know that, but it might. Certainly increases health span, your resiliency of your cells, and the ability to produce energy. But we don't really know much more than that.
Are there animal studies that you can share? I mean, I feel like that would be fairly easy to test in a mouse model, for example.
Yes, hundreds of them at this point. The mouse studies have shown that that almost every condition related to aging is also associated with a reduced level of NAD across the board, all tissues, all organs. And we've shown that in mouse studies and rat studies and pig studies and in dog studies, and increasingly in human studies. We've also shown that elevating NAD by giving them something like NR helps either preventing disease or actually in some ways treating disease. And we're at the somewhat early stages of that in humans. But we have made some significant progress even in human clinical studies.
Yeah, I mean, before you came in, I did just a brief scan, and I saw there were some pilot studies in Parkinson's disease. There have been others. Maybe you can speak to that.
Any indication that's related to mitochondrial dysfunction or inflammation sparks our interest, particularly things that are neuroinflammatory. And increasingly, as you read the material on Parkinson's, people believe that it's mitochondrial, that it's related to mitochondria. So that's been an area of high emphasis for us. By the way, Alzheimer's as well, mostly because the dementia is related to neuroinflammation. But in the case of Parkinson's, we've now published 3 studies on nicotinamide riboside, which we call Niagen, and Parkinson's. Now, there were 2 phase 1s and a phase 2, and they're mostly about safety. And one was about a dose response. We showed that up to 3 grams a day actually had a dose response and was safe. But as a secondary outcome in all 3 of those studies, we looked at the traditional Parkinson's markers, things like blood flow or motor behavior, and all have shown a significant improvement. So we're very encouraged, and we've just completed a 4-year study with 400 participants of Parkinson's. 200 received a placebo, 200 received a gram a day of Niagen every day for a year. So we're extremely excited. That's considered a phase 3, maybe even a phase 4 clinical study. We don't know the results yet. They haven't been presented to us. I think at the time that we started that study, a gram a day seemed like a lot. Today, it doesn't seem like a lot. We all take a gram a day routinely, but back then people were taking 2. We didn't know. We've learned a lot about its safety. Maybe if we were to start it today, we'd do a much higher dose, something probably more like 3 grams, which was that phase 2 clinical that I mentioned. But we're particularly intrigued about Parkinson's because it's mitochondrial, and we know that when you elevate NAD, you have higher functioning mitochondria. So we're cautiously optimistic.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, my mom had a Parkinsonian condition, and I know that it's there are precious few therapies that actually work, let alone have a clinically meaningful disease-modifying effect. I mean, there are none that I could think of. There's, we have these biochemical band-aids to supplement essentially the dopamine that's lost, but beyond that. Once you've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, half of the neurons involved in the substantia nigra, in the half of the dopamine-producing neurons in that region of the brain, are already dead. So it is any kind of therapy that might potentially have a disease-modifying effect. I mean, that's perks me up.
Increasingly we believe that people get Parkinson's at a much younger age, but it doesn't manifest till they're much older. That could very well be because of the NAD levels in the cells, in the relevant cells. Just the resilience there is not there. So it could very well be by elevating NAD levels in these cells. It's not that it would be necessarily curative for Parkinson's, but enable the body to be better equipped to manage it, as though they were younger.
Yeah, we've done a number of episodes looking at the potential link between exposure to environmental toxicants like certain herbicides and pesticides and Parkinson's disease. And so it's interesting that, would you say that part of how they might work is to enhance in some way the resilience of the cells, like protect them in some way?
Exactly.
Very, very interesting. So then what is the relationship between NR, nicotinamide riboside, and NAD?
So NAD was initially discovered in something like 1906. Researchers were investigating fermentation in yeast, and they realized that there was this coenzyme that was involved in the energy metabolism process. Then in like the 1930s, there was this outbreak of a condition called progeria. And they found out that they could cure this disease with vitamin B3, and that vitamin B3 elevated NAD, and by elevating NAD, they were able to cure progeria.
And B3 is niacin, right?
Yeah. So niacin increases NAD. There are several molecules that increase NAD. nicotinamide riboside, or Niagen, is not the only one. It just happens to be the best one. But it's not the only one. There are other ways to elevate NAD. Then in the 1950s, it was discovered that NAD was central to this Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, the process of actually making energy within the cell. And actually, the Nobel Prize winner who discovered that is the father of one of our current scientific advisors, Roger Kornberg. It was Arthur Kornberg. Roger also is a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry at Stanford. And then in 2003, Charles Brenner, who you've had on twice, had this incredible discovery that nicotinamide riboside, which is found in trace amounts in milk, not only more efficiently elevates NAD levels in the cell than anything else we've seen, more than niacin, more than anything else, and not only extremely safely, but it does something else fairly remarkable, which is when a cell is under specific metabolic stress, it opens up a pathway that he named the NR kinase pathway, calling out for whatever trace amounts of NR are floating through the bloodstream. So NR is amazing in that it not only safely and efficiently elevates NAD, but it specifically does it in the cells that are the most damaged.
Wow, interesting.
Right. So people say to me all the time, what can I expect if I start taking True Niagen? And my answer is, what's broken? What worked better 10 years ago? Could it be your elbow pain? Could it be recovery from workouts? Could it be your sleep level, retrieval, cognition, something like this? It could be an actual disease that you're trying to manage. But this is where to look. Often people say the number one reason people stop taking it is because they take it for 2 weeks. They say, I didn't feel anything. Well, a lot of people say they do feel much more energized. That's very, very common. But we don't like people to think in terms of feel, because there are other things that will affect the way you feel, like hormone levels or stimulants like caffeine or how much you slept. Better is to try to take a scientific approach before you start taking what worked better once, and try to quantify it. Try to create a metric around it, and then take it for 2 or 3 months, and then measure it. Is it your recovery rate on your workouts? Is your levels of your workouts or your sleep levels? That's where the most damaged cells are. And that's where you're most likely to see the benefit if you are patient and you give it time.
And how much time do you think it might take to start to see an improvement?
In my experience, the diligence that I personally did behind the company was I started taking it for several months before I made the decision to make an investment and even go on the board. I had a knee from a skiing accident that I had been living with for 10 years, and the knee pain was fairly severe, and I favored the other leg every time I went up the steps. The other thing is I had reached a point in my life where I wasn't sleeping through the night. Like every night I was getting up in the middle of the night, and I thought, well, that's getting old. Both of those dramatically improved after 3 months. Both of those. In fact, today I don't even remember which was the knee that hurt. That's a dramatic reduction of inflammation. Did it help? Was it a meniscus tear? I don't even know what the actual diagnosis was. But it ain't there now. And I still, now I've been taking this for 10 years, I still sleep great. Whereas I went for a number of years where I couldn't sleep through the night. So that indicated to me that those two issues that were broken at the time improved. And that convinced me from my own personal experience. And that's how I then got more deeply involved in the enterprise.
What dose are you taking?
I take 1,000 milligrams every day. But as you and I were talking before, for example, last week I had to go to Madrid for 2 days and then Sydney for 2 days and then return. That's a lot of time zone changes. That's a lot of flying. So I started taking 2 grams a day, and I got 4 actual injections.
Injections of NR or injections of, because I know that they're offering that now in certain places, like pure NAD, straight, like mainlined.
Don't take pure NAD.
Don't? Okay.
Do not. No, I get shots of Niagen.
Niagen, wow.
And I was fine. I mean, literally, the plane landed, and I went to work. I was on a conference call in an hour, and I feel good. It really does manage, circadian rhythms are tied to NAD levels, so when you do time zone changes and you fly a lot, it helps.
Interesting.
But also the energy metabolism problem. So I take a gram a day every day, but then I vary it, I up it depending on how I'm feeling or what's going on in my life at that time.
Yeah, your allostatic load, your stress load.
Exactly.
Why would you say it's not smart to take NAD? Because I know it's kind of trendy. I don't know if trendy is the right word, but people are doing it, at least here in LA. And they always say it makes them feel sick.
Every one of them. It makes them feel sick, and they sweat, and they have headaches. Today, there are 0 studies, and I spend a lot of time reading studies, so does our team, that we know of that show that taking NAD elevates NAD. NAD is not bioavailable. It's a very large molecule, and it's a nucleotide, meaning there's a phosphate group on the perimeter of it. It cannot enter cells. You inject it into your bloodstream, it pours through your bloodstream, it tries to get up into the cells, and all you're doing is creating inflammation. It doesn't get in.
Whoa.
What happens is it breaks down into many smaller molecules, one of which is NR. That NR will then get up into the cell. So we say, why not just inject yourself with NR? And so it took us several years to get on the approved list of ingredients that could be compounded, and for us to develop pharmaceutical grade NR, because if you're going to inject or do an IV, it has to be pharmaceutical grade. And we've now made that available. We're in about 1,000 clinics across the country. But you have no side effects. These people go into NAD and they sweat, they have stomach pains. If you get a Niagen IV, it ingests in just a few minutes without the side effects, and many times higher NAD levels than actual NAD. And Niagen is the way to go. It's the better NAD product. So that's what I get. I don't get an NAD. I know a lot of people go in and get these NAD IV infusions, and they go through the punishment. If they just switched to Niagen, they'd change their life.
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of quote unquote biohacking clinics trying to sell you on NAD drips.
It's very hot right now. It's very popular. There are articles all over the place about it. These people that are, it's a larger conversation about the dietary supplement space in general, how you could play, in my opinion, a very vital role in helping to educate consumers. That's an example of misinformation. It's trendy, people are selling it, people make money by selling it, but the science isn't there. The studies don't yet exist for taking NAD. If you go online, you'll see all these companies selling an NAD supplement. NAD supplements don't elevate NAD. You need a precursor. You need something that cleanly and safely gets into the cell and converts into NAD. And the same is true with IV and injection. But the industry hasn't evolved to a place where there's a way for consumers to learn that information. This is why we were excited that you invited us and to come on here and try to explain that. It transcends just NAD. It's dietary supplements in general.
Oh yeah, we've talked about that quite a bit. The lack of scientific literacy is more often than not exploited to sell products these days. But there are many instances where something that might sound good or at least appear like a positive thing on paper or like a positive thing to take, the bioavailability is just like really poor, or it just doesn't, from a physiology standpoint, even begin to make sense. I mean, nitric oxide, I believe, is an example of something like that, where it's like, there's a ton of nitric oxide products on the market that barely have any efficacy. Glutathione is another one where orally it's very poorly bioavailable. I know that liposomal formulations are different, but in general, like glutathione is a good thing, but that doesn't mean that supplementing with it in capsule form is gonna have any impact on glutathione levels in the body. So
liposomal products will help you get through the gut and the liver, but it doesn't necessarily help you get upregulated up into the cell. But it's even a deeper problem than that, is that that's the problem at the molecular ingredient level. But the percentage of companies that are selling ingredients that what's in the bottle meets what's in the label is shockingly low. Shockingly low. And there really is no mechanism for the average consumer to know, well, I see the ad here and I recognize the influencer, or, the ad seems fairly well produced and I've heard of this ingredient. I'll just buy it. The price is good. I'll just buy it. But there's no mechanism there for saying, trust this company.
Right.
Trust this label. What are the C of A's? Where did they make it? Was it tested? What are the quality assurances? That mechanism doesn't exist. Theoretically, the FDA should police that. But they can't. I mean, they have a very small budget, and there are literally thousands of companies. So the entry barriers for somebody to get into the dietary supplement space at this point are extremely low between Amazon and available suppliers overseas. It's extremely low. There's much more than the FDA can oversee, or the FTC. So they wait till somebody gets actually hurt before they take action.
Wow.
So the vast majority of companies selling dietary supplements really could be selling chocolate bars. We don't know.
Yeah, and when you buy supplements on Amazon, I mean, I buy supplements on Amazon, but I'm pretty good. I'm pretty diligent and discerning when it comes to, I know what to look for when vetting a product on Amazon. Otherwise, it's like Russian roulette, I would think, for your average consumer. We call it Amazon roulette, which is why it makes so much sense not only to buy directly from manufacturers, but manufacturers that are reputable and that are, maybe you can speak to what to look out for in terms of quality certifications.
There are no good quality certifications.
What about GMP?
Well, dietary supplements generally are not GMP. And those that say they are usually are not telling the truth. You don't have to be that level of grade. You just have to be food grade in order to sell a dietary supplement. There's NSF certification, which is a legitimate entity, and if you're going to sell it to any professional athletes, it has to be NSF certified. So if you see that, that's a trustworthy label. There are a few other companies. There's one called Alchemist, which puts a label on there, which we think is a reasonable company, at least for measuring the whether what's on the label is actually in the bottle. That's a good thing. But we think the industry in general should come together. And we're actually trying to do this. We've created something called the Trust Alliance. And we're trying to create an alliance of influencers, frankly, like you, and Amazon and Walmart, and dietary supplement companies that really go to the trouble of adhering to the regulations and really do quality controls, and will show where they made it and show the C of A of where they made it. And we're going to try to create a label that perhaps consumers can trust.
That's cool. Yeah, this is definitely a trusted space. We do our best to inform consumers and help. I do my best to help my listeners make the best choices for themselves possible.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, of course. I always, because of what I went through with my mom, I can't help but envision that there's somebody just like my mom at the other end listening to what we're recording, what I record on every episode in their headphones. And, I'm very just, I want to be as transparent and help them make the best decisions that they can for themselves.
That's beautiful.
You said that NR is found naturally in dairy. I didn't know that.
In milk.
Wow.
The elixir of actual life.
It was fascinating because the more I learn about dairy, the more impressed I am by it. And also, I remember that there was a time when I was not a fan of dairy. This was, many, many, many years ago when I had just, I guess by osmosis, absorbed some of the rhetoric that you hear sometimes from the wellness industry. Also there's a lot of money going into pushing consumers away from dairy-based products to their plant-based alternatives.
Right.
And all that is to say, the more I learn about dairy and the dark matter of compounds that are within it, the more impressed I am by its healing potential.
Nature had something in mind when they filled out all of our mothers with milk, specifically for the purpose of nurturing their young. Can't be all bad. One of the scientific advisors on our board is a guy named Bruce German, who's the head of life sciences at UC Davis and the world-leading expert on milk. And he's on our scientific advisory board specifically, and he's been doing several studies on NR and milk because it's present in milk and its impact. Charles Brenner, who you've had on, has done studies with the Gates Foundation on how elevating NR actually increases the amount of mother's milk that new moms produce. And that when moms who take NR pass the NR through their milk to the pups, to the babies are bigger, stronger, have larger brains.
Wow. So it's been shown in mammals that if the mother takes NR
in her chow,
there's more NR in the milk.
There's more NR in the milk. It transfers to the pups. The pups are healthier.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, nature wouldn't just put anything mother's milk is a very important compound. Species rely on it. Fascinating. Is it conserved in dairy products like cheese? Do we know?
I don't know.
Very interesting. Tell me more about your background, because we kind of have a similar background in that we both began sort of in the media world, but then we're completely and utterly seduced by science, and just how elegant and incredible the human body is, and your journey to becoming now the head of this fascinating and important science platform.
I did start in the movie business, but it wasn't some grand plan. I wasn't somebody who grew up and said, I need to make films. I fell into it. I studied economics, and my major in college was industrial and labor relations, which was management of organizations, and then went to business school, and I focused on finance and marketing. So I was like from a young age, I viewed myself as an enterprise builder leaning towards early stage, like an entrepreneur. I ended up working in the movie business because they recruited, and it seemed like a cool job. And then I went to work there at Columbia Pictures in the 80s, at a time where Hollywood was still operating in the footprint of Irving Thalberg, who had their finger on the pulse of young men who go to movie theaters. There was no real analysis going on. So we were unique in that we were introducing Excel spreadsheet analysis into the way that Hollywood does its business. The deals, the distribution, the films themselves, the operation of the studio. We did, the men I worked for, one guy named Chase Carey, another guy named Jonathan Dolgen, they referred to me as the grunt. Basically, I just broke everything down into cash. And it worked. At that time, Columbia Pictures was considered at the vanguard of business thinking, and financially performed extremely well relative to the other studios. And it was ultimately acquired by Sony. At the time, it was owned by Coca-Cola. But my interest was not in movies per se, but in the enterprise of the business. And it was evident that the most fragmented piece of the movie business was actual production. That's where an entrepreneur could do the most. Everything else was large company dealing with large company, but each film is an individual startup in essence. So I gravitated towards production, and Hollywood is very much about trends and what's hot now. And at that time, MBAs and spreadsheet analysis was like the hot unknown thing. So there was an intrigue about those of us that were in Hollywood doing that. So there was more interest in me than was warranted. And as things go in Hollywood, that meant I got the creative job. 1 + 1 doesn't seem to equal 2, but that's the way it works. And I ended up, in the production departments of these companies, and then ultimately producing films. And liked it very much. I mean, making films is a great thing. But then in the 90s, the internet really became more interesting in a way to me. So I sort of started mixing my time somewhat between films and then internet deals and internet startups, and I got involved in 3 of them, and that ended up taking much more of my time, and by the 2000s, I was marginally involved in movies, but I was interested in aging. I was a young man at that time, and I had met an investor who was investing actually in telomeres. And at that time, in the late 90s and the early 2000s, the state-of-the-art research on anti-aging science was telomeres starting to pivot to something called sirtuins. These were all the people who were researching, and I just found it interesting. And that interest became a passion, became actually a series of investments, and ultimately became this. So my pivot from Hollywood to this was not like a nonstop flight. It was a series of opportunities and chances and interests that one thing led to another, and before you know it, I was here.
And so for how many years would you say have you been steeped in this sort of anti-aging longevity space?
I've been a student of it since 1998.
Wow.
And I started investing in various companies, including that telomere company in 2000. And then another in the 2000s. Chromadex, Niagen Bioscience used to be called Chromadex. I began buying Chromadex stock in 2013 and went on the board in 2015 and became the CEO in 2018.
And what was that moment for you? Because you obviously had at that point exposure to all of these really novel and I would guess really impressive ideas in the longevity space, sirtuins, telomeres. What was it about NAD and ultimately NR that caught your interest?
The telomere research is interesting, but it never crossed over into something that was actually actionable or therapeutic. Same is true with sirtuins. The research around sirtuins was always questionable, is even to this day. The idea behind sirtuins is simply that if a mammal restricts its caloric intake, we've shown, there was a study in 1923 at Cornell that showed that when a mammal restricts its caloric intake, it lives longer. So they tried to replicate that with a molecule, and they believe, and it's the sirtuins that are activated, so they thought sirtuins are longevity genes. So there was an attempt to try to replicate that caloric restriction, mimic caloric restriction, as they say. And they thought they had found one in a molecule found in the skin of red grapes called resveratrol. They thought resveratrol would mimic caloric restriction and activate the sirtuin genes and extend lifespan. It turns out it's not the case. It doesn't mimic caloric restriction. It doesn't activate sirtuins, and probably sirtuins do not really even extend life. So, but the idea of it was exciting enough that people were interested in it and invested in it. It wasn't until, so after that failed, people said, well, why did that fail? And one theory was, well, maybe to actually activate these sirtuin genes, you need lots of NAD. So the idea of NAD was well known. This idea that to activate a gene, this energizer, this coenzyme called NAD has to be high. So there are all these experiments starting like in 2010 to show, well, what if I try to activate sirtuins by combining resveratrol with some NAD enhancer, like NR? It turns out that you don't need the resveratrol at all. Just elevating NAD activates the sirtuin genes. So I read all that, and then there was a published study in 2012 that I thought was inspiring, and then I said, okay, of all the things I've looked at, this NAD play is the play. It's actionable, it's safe, it works, it's activating these genes. And then it was a sort of a coincidence that I was able to come across this particular company that had this wide patent portfolio of all these molecules that elevate NAD, especially the big one, NR. So
it's so interesting. What do you see if you had like a crystal ball in front of you in terms of what the future holds for NAD research?
It really is just the tip of the spear here. We're understanding this whole idea of letting the body heal itself is a great idea for many types of indications, not just cancer, which they've been thinking about that for a long time, but others as well. And this idea of strengthening the cell and seeing if the cell itself can help us treat the disease is a great idea, and a great way to do that is to elevate NAD. So I think you're going to see dramatic advancements with NAD research in the pharma space, in the biotech space, in a whole host of disease indications, not just inflammation-related or mitochondrial-related, other things as well. And all these studies are being done right now. with many companies. I also think there are some major applications for things like even cosmetics. Like we recently did a study that showed that NR applied to the skin does penetrate the skin and does elevate NAD in the skin cells. And by doing that, we've studied elasticity, age spots, even there's this thing called the Niagen glow. These people that go in and get their IVs of Niagen, they seem one day later it's this thing they call the Niagen glow. They see it in their skin, in their face. So I think you're going to see cosmetic applications actually quite dramatically in the cosmetic space, but I also think you're going to see very aggressive pharmaceutical investigations in a whole range of diseases, maybe as a complement to other drugs, maybe not in and of itself as a therapeutic cure, but as a complement to others. So I think you'll see it in beverages and drinks because it elevates mitochondrial function without adding calories. I think it's relevant, to that space. We know that it's safe. So I think NAD's got a really nice, bright future.
Now, it's a niacin derivative. You've said many times that it's safe. Is there any concern with regards to boosting NAD via supplementation and cancer risk?
Some say yes. Cancer cells have NAD. So if you're going to elevate NAD in a cancer cell, you're going to make the cancer cell stronger. So there is clearly some risk. However, exercise elevates NAD. So would you advise somebody who's been diagnosed with cancer to not exercise or not sleep or not eat well? The anti-cancer properties dramatically outweigh the cancer-enhancing properties. But just in case, we also brought onto our scientific advisory board one of the leading cancer researchers at Scripps Research Institute, Bruni Felding. And she's done numerous studies on nicotinamide riboside and even all the range of vitamin B3s and a whole range of cancers, breast cancer, brain cancer, lung cancer, other cancers. And she's written white papers to show that it actually has much more anti-cancer properties than pro-cancer properties. But there are skeptics who say that. And there's a logic behind it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, my knowledge of the connection there is super cursory. But yeah, I mean, I think it's like, it's very many nutrients. Their impacts on physiology, on biology, ultimately, are context dependent. If you're eating a high carbohydrate diet, for example, and you are an athlete, like that high carbohydrate diet is going to greatly support your physical performance. If you're eating a high carbohydrate diet and you're in a calorie surplus and you're a desk jockey and you've got, glucose dysregulation, then maybe that's not the best diet for you. So it's very, I definitely appreciate the nuance and the context there.
Niacin is also a vitamin B3, and niacin does elevate NAD. It doesn't do it as well as Niagen, but it does it. It has that side effect of flushing. But niacin's been on the market since the 1950s, and it's not in any way associated with increased cancer risk.
I'm a fan of the niacin flush. Is there any benefit to doing that, or is that just masochism disguised as a wellness habit?
I don't think the flush is an indication of something good. And anything niacin could do, why not just take NR and you'll have... Really, the main health benefits from niacin is NAD elevation.
Interesting.
So you can only take a limited amount of niacin, and even the amount that you take won't elevate NAD as well as NR. So, I'm a fan of niacin too, but NR's here.
Do you think it's beneficial to consume dairy because of its NR content?
The trace amounts of NR found in milk is so small. But yes, to a small degree, but not in a large degree.
If you could erase one BS narrative in the longevity world, what would it be?
That we can extend life. I think it's reasonable to assume that we can extend health span, the number of years we live young, vital, sexy lives. But I don't know that it's realistic that we can extend the number of years that we live at this point. It's just involved in too many genes and too many factors that there's going to be any one thing that's going to extend it. The lack of disease, the lack of injury perhaps will extend your life, but overall, I think that people are looking for something that's going to help them live longer, and I don't know that that's going to materialize.
I mean, humans have been looking for the fountain of youth since time immemorial, right? Like it's almost a human universal. Every culture has its own means of grasping desperately for that extra year, that extra decade.
It's possible that Ray Kurzweil book, The Singularity is Nearer, is a great book. The first one was great too. But he does talk about, he has a whole chapter on it, on the various pursuits. By the way, he's a true Niagen guy too.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, very early. Like, when I started at the company, it was one of the first calls.
I've been a Ray Kurzweil enjoyer for many years at this point.
Too.
I didn't know he had a new book out.
Yeah, he wrote a follow-up to The Singularity is Near, and it's fantastic.
Wow, okay, cool.
He's got a whole chapter on ways that we could extend life, and it sounds from what he thinks and from what he wrote that it's much more of a data-oriented pursuit, like an information technology pursuit, as opposed to a biological one. In other words, downloading all the information that is us onto essentially the cloud or a hard drive. So you replicate you. There are two yous, and that's the way that we'll be able to extend ourselves. So it's possible that humans or some form of the human species will live for many more than 100, 110 years, but it would not be a pure biological form, probably. It would be something a little different. We may be on the verge of evolving into a different form of species.
Well, the success of AI really makes me feel like we've crossed a new bridge. It's crazy to me. I'm curious to know your thoughts on AI as it pertains to longevity seeking, because and even Kurzweil's whole notion of being able to upload your consciousness into a technological substrate, to me it's like, I did a reel on Instagram the other day. I posted a reel about ways to upgrade your rice. It was like a silly little reel. I mean, it was a good reel, but there was this Instagram feature where it said you could translate my reel into different languages. So I'm like, okay, like maybe it's going to have like the different language underneath. It literally dubbed my own voice into the other language perfectly. Portuguese, there was Hindi, there was Spanish. And not only that, not only did it recreate my voice and dub it into these, as like a native Portuguese speaker, but it changed the way that my lips were moving. So it literally looked like I was a native Portuguese speaker. It was crazy. And that, I couldn't help but think about Kurzweil, and how, ultimately, I use ChatGPT. It knows who I am. It knows my voice. It knows my interests. It knows almost everything about me. And so it's hard to imagine that in some way it's not, being cross-wired into our biology, and, once biotrackers and our, medical records and all that stuff get weaved into this AI tapestry, this infinitely capable AI tapestry, that it's not going to have some kind of benefit in terms of human longevity.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that. A very interesting thing that you just said. First of all, you have a great voice, so if they were able to replicate it, that's pretty impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, they did. It was wild.
But imagine if they were able to move your lips in a credible way. They were able to replicate your voice. They were able to convert it into another language, and the content they can certainly research. Is it conceivable at some point that the Genius Life podcast will be done without you? the entire podcast will take place and you didn't even do anything.
It's conceivable.
Right.
There's haven't there been some actors, you would know, actors at this point that have sold their likeness?
Yeah, in fact, there are agents out there trying to persuade actors that you better copyright your name and your likeness and your sound, because it's going to get used at some point.
It's wild.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of downloading all the information that is you onto a hard drive or something, does that hard drive have rights? Is that a human? Is that a person? Is it you? I do think we're entering into an interesting phase, and it certainly will have an impact on the longevity as an industry and an impact. But in terms of biological interventions that we know of today, there's a lot of discussion about molecules like rapamycin or metformin or other things. I'm skeptical that any of those are actually going to prolong life or stall the aging process. But what NAD elevation does, if you have a molecule that can safely elevate NAD, is it makes the cell more resilient, and it enables the cell to deal with the conditions that emerge. There was one other thing that I wanted to say that I think NAD is, if you don't mind, that NAD I think is particularly valuable for, and that is fatigue, this idea of energy metabolism. There are a number of conditions and diseases that people contract that the symptoms are fatigue, exhaustion. There's like Lyme disease and mononucleosis. And we were approached by some researchers at Mass General, Harvard, about long COVID. Long COVID is this really interesting disease because in order to be diagnosed with long COVID, you have to test negative for COVID. So it's one of the few diseases that in order to have, you have to test negative. But the symptoms are, and so it's very difficult to know if you actually have it. But the predominant symptom is fatigue. There's also this thing called brain fog, and there's depression, and there's sleep issues, but it was fatigue that we were most intrigued about because we know that's a mitochondrial thing, and we think that elevating NAD would have a benefit for all of these kinds of diseases. And they did this long COVID study, and it was a small study. They struggled to recruit people. They got only, I think, 58 people, and so to do a controlled study, a placebo study with only 58 people, it's not quite a hell of a lot of people. And when a study is that small, in order to achieve statistical significance, they have to have a very high level of improvement. And they completed the study, and the primary endpoint, which was comparing this small placebo team to this small NR team, they took 2 grams a day for 10 weeks, didn't show a difference. But when they took the placebo team and they then started giving them NR for another 10 weeks, so you had an additional 10 weeks with a much larger population, it did show a dramatic difference. So that's why we got excited about the results of that. And that was published, I think, just like a week or 2 ago.
Wow. Very interesting. But so it was then open label at that point, right? Like did the subjects know that they were getting active ingredient?
You mean after the first 10 weeks?
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, it's fascinating stuff. Do you think that NAD is going to be the vitamin D of the next decade, something that we all didn't know that we were deficient in?
Our head of scientific research, who is really a part of his training is regulatory approvals and nutrition in general, believes so. He thinks that we should make an aggressive move with the government to make sure that there were minimum daily requirements or minimum daily NAD levels. When our NAD levels are higher, we're more resistant to disease and we heal better. So he believes so. I don't know.
Yeah. Low in, I should have said. We're not necessarily all deficient in vitamin D, although many of us are. But yeah, it is interesting. I mean, vitamin D is something that you don't really hear much of these days. But last I checked, 3/4 of the global adult population is low in vitamin D.
There have been very recent studies published on vitamin D. I mean, it continues to be a very, very critical and important thing if you elevate your vitamin. And there's even drug development right now about vitamin D. No, vitamin D is clearly something that's very, very important. We actually released this product that we call True Niagen Immune because we said to the researchers that work at the Niagen labs, I actually said to them, listen, what do you think I should be taking every day? And they said, you should be taking zinc, D, C, and Niagen. So we make a product with all that in it. And really the only reason we do it is for us because they're ingredients that I've not been in this business for a long time, but I've been in it long enough that I really don't trust anybody except us. So you should take vitamin D, and I would only take it from Niagen Bio at this point, just based on what I've seen and learned. So D is important.
Any other molecules that you think are worth looking into from a quote unquote anti-aging standpoint? I mean, there's a lot of hype now on creatine.
Yes, there's a lot of hype on creatine.
Do you take it?
I don't. There are a lot of we get pitched these ingredients all the time that this is going to be the next NR, this is the next Niagen. Creatine is getting increasingly popular. Until we see the data, controlled, published, peer-reviewed studies from independent sources that don't have an incentive to hype it, I'm skeptical. But there's a lot of it on D and C, but not a lot on creatine.
From a longevity standpoint?
From a longevity or even a health standpoint. I mean, but increasingly people are talking about creatine.
Yeah. No, I take it. I mean, I take it for the physical performance aspect, the cognitive. But no, I'm definitely happy to learn more about NAD. It's definitely been a blind spot for me, but everything that I've learned from Dr. Charles Brenner, who's been on the show, and experimenting myself with Niagen, it's been just a fascinating journey, and I do fairly regularly, check in on the current state of the science. I'll check like if there are new studies being published, and I love to see how much activity there is, and I know that you guys are big champions for it. So,
well, we've had 41 peer-reviewed published clinical studies. There are approximately 30 more in process right now. There have been a couple of hundred preclinical studies, and we're very aggressive about this. We have this program called the SERP program, where we work directly with research institutions around the world to further the education of NAD research, but specifically NR and Niagen in particular. So we're very heavy into the research and aggressive, and I'm happy to share the upcoming news. We have this website called aboutnad.com. It really it doesn't promote anything. You can't purchase anything from it. It doesn't link to Niagen or True Niagen or anything like that. It's just an objective listing of all the research being done in the NAD space in real time. So it's a good resource to check if you just want to see what's going on in terms of research in the area.
And you mentioned that there's no reliable way to check your own NAD levels. Is there any way to look under the hood, so to speak?
Yeah, there are blood tests. And they're accurate for what is the NAD level inside your blood.
In blood, yeah.
And it's good as a gauge. Like, how did I compare to, say, 6 months ago?
Yeah.
But in terms of an indication of, certainly it's not a good indicator of your metabolic age. There are much better markers than that.
It's similar to magnesium. Like, the magnesium blood test is not very valuable because most of the magnesium in your body is stored in bones and other tissues. It's not really in your blood, yeah.
Further, sometimes those tests, all they're doing is measuring NAD in the plasma, not in the red blood cells. So if you inject yourself with NAD and then you do a blood test, you're going to see NAD in the blood. But NAD in the blood doesn't mean it's getting to the tissue. It's got to get up into the red blood cells and then make its way across the blood-brain barrier or get into the lungs or the heart. So it's not a great measure, but it's better than nothing. And it's good as a baseline measure.
Love it. Well, where can listeners learn? You've already dropped your educational resource website. Where can they try Niagen? And then I got one last question for you.
Well, we have a website, trueniagen.com. If they're interested in the injection or the IV, it's available in 1,000 clinics here in LA. Restore locations and Next Health have it. Around the country, there are many clinics. Just check. There's a website called niagenplus.com NAD.com, you can look up a store locator if you're interested in going in and getting an IV or an injection. And of course, the corporate website is NiagenBioscience.com.
Got it. Love it. We'll put all those websites in the show description, in the show notes. Well, thanks for coming out. Thank you for
What's your question?
Yeah, so the last question.
Oh, okay.
The last question is, what does living a genius life mean to you? What does living a genius life mean to you?
You know, how I spend as sort of not a genius life to me is a curious life. For me, I've been fortunate that I've been able to spend time in a really interesting industry, Hollywood, and then internet, and then I've done some interesting international transactions, and of course this is fascinating. But I find that continuing to challenge oneself, get further educated, learn more, be intellectually curious, and try things that are different is a genius life. And having said that, I still believe that if you're fortunate enough to be able to surround yourself with people who love you and who you love, transcends anything else.
Beautifully put. Well said. Well, thanks for coming out.
Thank you for the invite. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you guys for listening. Share this episode with friends and loved ones that may benefit from it. Check out True Niagen, and that's spelled TRUNIAGEN.com. And I will catch you on the next episode. Peace. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.